In honor of Masturbation May, I wanted to share a really personal story with you. So, I know that so many women will be able to relate to the story. And honestly, it's one that has shaped how I have experienced my body and my pleasure for years. And it still has an impact on my sexuality today. So, without further ado, I'm going to dive in. So, my first memory of touching my body, exploring my body, dates back to when I was 5 years old and in France on holiday with my family. And so, I have this memory of lying in bed at night and being busy touching myself and it feeling good, and someone walking into the room. And the minute they walked in, I immediately froze and stopped doing what I was doing, and I pretended to be asleep. And so that is the memory that I have carried with me all these years. And I've shared it over the years with a few people, but not many, because I've always felt a tremendous amount of shame around how could a 5-year-old be doing this? Why was a 5-year-old touching their body, right? And what I really want to invite you to understand is that 5-year-old me didn't know what she was doing. All she knew that she'd figured out a way that she was touching her body that felt good to her. And that combined with the fact that she knew that she shouldn't be touching herself down there led to quite a bit of an internal struggle and conflict. So, me stopping, pretending to be asleep, is really showing that I already knew then that I shouldn't be doing this. But the reality is that it felt so good to me, I wasn't willing to stop. And so this is also important to understand. There are many women out there that may figure out what feels good to them and avoid doing it because it's been so shamed, it's made to be so wrong. So now in my case, I didn't stop doing what I was doing because it felt so good to me. But this then led to rushed, secretive pleasure seeking. So instead of me having a space where it was normalized and I was allowed to touch my body in whatever way felt good to me, I had to sneak around. I had to pretend to be doing something else. And so it meant that I was never really allowed to freely explore my body. I learned early on that this was wrong. And so the long-term effect of this is that I would hide, I would rush, I would keep my legs stretched out in front of me, super tense. I would tense all my muscles. And I had like one tried and tested technique that got me there every single time. And I also want to, really speak to the fact that at that point in time, what I was doing was just something that felt good to me. I didn't understand what sex was. I didn't know what sex was at the time. I just knew that if I touched my body in this way, it felt good to me. Just like other children, we eat an ice cream that feels nice to us. We enjoy eating ice cream. We love eating ice cream, want more ice cream. This was all that was for me. Yet I knew that what I was doing was wrong, which is why I had to hide. I had to suppress my pleasure. I had to pretend that I was doing someone else for fear that someone would catch me doing this horrible thing. And so in my brain, I had told myself that if anyone caught me doing this, I would never be loved. I would never be accepted. And so this really shaped how I was able to experience pleasure in my body. And so over the years, sometimes someone would walk in on me or see me or my brother. I remember a few times walking in and being a small child, running to my mom and telling my mom that I was doing something funny, and me running after him up to my mom and being like, he's lying. Why on earth would I do this? This is so bad, right? So all of this resulted in me lying to my parents and feeling a tremendous amount of shame around what I was doing. But I was never prepared to give it up because it felt so good to me. And, the reality is my parents never pulled me aside or had a conversation around it. And that's also not their fault because my parents were never given the tools to have this kind of conversation with their children. They didn't know how to address this. It was easier for them to pretend that it wasn't happening and walk away from the situation than to actually address what was happening, because what would that mean? What would that look like? And so I really want to speak to this because our first relationship that we're going to have with anyone as we grow up is with ourselves and our own sexuality, right? So the relationship that we have to ourselves and our sexuality is crucially important. And for many of us, that relationship is shrouded in shame, in secrecy, in hiding, in pretending to do something that we're not doing. We're not allowed to feel pleasure. We shouldn't be doing this. We shouldn't speak to anyone about this. And so that results in a lot of secrecy. And the problem with this is that we're never really given the time and space to explore our bodies, to figure out what we like, to lean into what feels good to us, what we might enjoy more of. And so we end up going through life with very limited experience of what we enjoy. Or in my case, I knew exactly how I needed to be touched, what I liked, because I'd really been practicing that for so many years. But I'd done it in a very specific way where it was, I had to rush. I had to not breathe or make any loud noises. I couldn't sound. I couldn't really express myself. And these are all patterns that I then took into all the future relationships I had with my partners at the time. So I'd never learned how to experience pleasure with someone else. And because the pleasure I was experiencing on my own was this very secretive, bad, wrong thing, I didn't know how to tell them what I liked or how to touch me in that way because I'd never seen anyone else experience orgasm or pleasure from this tense place. Like my legs had to be stretched out in front of me. I needed to be in a very specific position or pattern. And I didn't know how to communicate that. And that resulted in me faking my experiences, faking my pleasure with partners, when the reality was I could orgasm perfectly fine on my own. And so I really want to take a moment to let that sink in, that we're not taught how to experience pleasure in our bodies. We're taught that the pleasure we experience is wrong. There's never a period or a time where that is made okay. And so we end up having sex or intimacy in exactly the same way we learn to touch ourselves, rushed, quiet, tensed up, and it's very limited. And this is a pattern that I see in so many of my clients, right? So whether it's their partners, they know exactly what they like, and we go in for penetration and it's boom, 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 and then we need to have that orgasm and we're chasing that orgasm, and that's all we're chasing. And so for me growing up, that's what I used to chase was my orgasm because it felt so good for me. It was this like mind-blowing moment of just release. And I started associating pleasure with release in my brain. And over the years, that's created a few struggles for me because, having to hide what I was doing meant that I couldn't just enjoy myself. And so what's happened now as an adult is I tend to get turned on if my partner leaves the house because that signals to my brain, oh, it's safe for me to quickly experience pleasure. And that's pretty messed up. And that's a pattern that I have had to work on and I'm still working on. And so I'm sharing all of this to normalize where so many of our struggles come from. Our struggles come from the space where we were never allowed to explore this freely. There was never a time where this wasn't wrong or bad or weird or taboo. Even when I speak to my clients of, have you shown your partner what you like? Have you masturbated lying next to each other so you can see how you touch each other's bodies? And a lot of them, their eyes are like, Louise, what on earth are you suggesting? That's so wrong. That's so bad. And that's the level of shame we feel around touching our bodies, exploring our bodies, feeling our bodies, right? And there is nothing wrong with touching and exploring our bodies. How can we expect anyone to pleasure us if we do not know what our bodies like, how our bodies want to be touched? And of course, we will only ever have one way of experiencing pleasure if we've never been given the freedom and the time and the spaciousness to explore other routes of pleasure, to explore other pathways that could be there. Because my pattern came about because I'd figured one thing that felt so good to me. And I knew that I wasn't allowed to do this. So I would sneak little moments away where I knew I had like 2 to 3 minutes max to touch my body and get that like instant relief, that like stress relief, that amazing feeling in my body. And so I did the same thing over and over again for years. And that created a deeply ingrained neural pathway, a pattern in my body. And that is something that it's taken me years to work on and years to change. And it didn't have to be that way. So I'm sharing my story here with you today because I want to normalize this. I want to normalize early bodily exploration as a natural part of development and growth. Most of us do it. Some of us do it in hiding, ashamed, and wrong. And some of us start the exploration and then we're so ashamed and we feel so much guilt that we stop. And we never go back to exploring our bodies. We never learn how to touch our bodies, how to connect with our bodies, how to feel our bodies. And so I want to invite you to reflect on the following, right? What did you learn about pleasure growing up? What was your messaging around pleasure? So I was taught nothing about pleasure. No one spoke to me about pleasure or my pleasure being important, or that it was something that I should prioritize and make time for. It just didn't exist. This is vacuum. Pleasure, what pleasure? And then what beliefs are you still carrying around your pleasure today? Right? How is this holding you back from touching your body, from exploring your body, from figuring out what you like? And how is this impacting your sex life? So if you feel that you need to orgasm in a very specific way, and if you're not orgasming like that and you're making your experience wrong, how is that impacting your sex life? How is the idea of you exploring different positions or trying different things or not being willing to try different things impacting your sex life? And I want to remind you that if you've struggled with any of these things, there is nothing wrong with you, just like there was nothing wrong with me. I often go back and think of that like 5-year-old little girl who was touching her body, and I am so proud of her because she figured out something that she liked, something that felt good to her, and she didn't let anyone tell her otherwise. Yes, she did it in shame. Yes, she did it in secret. But that pleasurable thing that she felt, she was not willing to let go of it. And I am so proud of her for that. Yes, that created many patterns, many other things that I've had to work on. But there was a part of me that always knew that there was something more to this than what I was experiencing. And it's that piece of me that knew that there must be something more that resulted in me working on my struggles, signing up for a 650 plus hour coaching certification just to heal myself. And it's that part of me that chose to do this work to support other women so they never have to struggle like I did. So that we can normalize these very conversations that we've carried so much guilt and shame and discomfort around. Because the truth is, there is nothing wrong with you. We've been taught to shame our bodies, to shame our pleasure, to shame our experience of pleasure. And every single one of us will experience pleasure in a different way. Some of us might explore, figure something out at the age of 5. Some of us, it might be a little bit later. Some of us, it might be in our 20s. There is no wrong or right way to figure this out. My invitation is that we create a space where this becomes normal. Exploring of what feels good to you is normalized. Taking time out to connect with your body is normal. It's not selfish, it's not bad, it's not shameful. And so we have to unlearn everything we've learned about sex, about sexuality, about what that should look like, that we're doing this for someone else, for someone else's pleasure. Sex and intimacy, it's for you. It's for you to enjoy. First relationship you're going to have with anyone in your life is with yourself. So what relationship can you cultivate to yourself, to your sexuality? Can you turn yourself on? Can you feel inspired by your own body? And it's when we start looking at our bodies from that lens that so much starts to shift. And that is my invitation for every single one of you. So if you're ready to unlearn some of the shame you're feeling around touching your body or exploring your body, where you're like, shit, I don't even know where to start. That is totally normal. And that's why I created the Bloom with Love challenge. It is a super easy challenge. Well, for some people, it will be easy. For others, it will be hard. But I've designed it in such a way that it's an entry point for you. It's a place for you to start reconnecting with your body, figuring out what feels good to you. How do you want to touch your body? How can you just connect with that sensual, erotic part of yourself on a daily basis? And the reason why it works so well is because these practices take under 5 minutes a day. They are the very practices that I do every single day to connect to my body, to touch my body, to feel connected to who I am and my sensual, erotic aliveness that's within me. And so if you want to continue or start this journey, I really invite you to sign up for the Bloom with Love Challenge. It will really support you. And I'm curious to hear, how did you find this? I know this is a topic that can bring up a lot of feelings for many of us. We don't want to see children as being sexual, and that's not my invitation here, right? What I was doing was not at all sexual. 5-year-old me, what she was doing, she was just exploring her body in a way that felt good to her. That was it. She figured something out that felt really, really pleasurable, and she was doing that. That's it. And we need to remind ourselves of that. It's so easy to look at everything through the sexual lens, but the reality is, from the moment we're born, we're cultivating a relationship with our bodies, and we get to choose what that relationship looks like. And for many of us, we've completely disconnected from our bodies. We've been taught to shame our bodies. We've been taught to reject our bodies. We've been taught to feel guilty about whatever pleasure we may or may not feel. So we detach and we live up in here in our heads, overthinking, thinking through things a million times over, struggling to connect, wondering what's wrong with us. And that's the missing piece. It's this mind-body connection. So that's my invitation here for you today. How can we undo a little bit of that narrative? And that's the invitation in the Bloom with Love Challenge, is to reconnect with you, with your body, to explore her and to come home to your truth.